Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a project update video for my 1/6 scale Cadillac Gage M706 V100 Armored car. Since the last video update, the remainder of the top hull details have been added, and at this point here, the model, more or less, the hull-wise speaking, is ready for painting. But we'll be going over all of these additions, as well as several of these key detail features in this video. So stay tuned, because there's going to be a bit of info coming right at you. One bit of detailing that I was on the fence of whether or not I was going to add is a rear gunner position found on this model. As we know, or as we've seen in the other videos, on the rear portion of the V100, there is a large crew hatch found on the back, and in many cases, this was used for a external gunner. Originally, there would have been a fellow over there, either with an M60 machine gun on the bipod, I've even seen an M1919 on a tripod, or even just a guy sticking his head out with an M16. Regardless, as the vehicle entered or was in service for a longer period of time, the crews would start modifying and adding extra things to better suit their needs, and some of which was to add extra firepower by adding extra MG pintle mounts scattered along the vehicle. And one place where this was very commonly seen was right in the back section near the rear door. The way this was added was they would take a standard soft skin pintle mount, like basically what I'm doing over here, chopping it and then welding it directly to the rear section of the vehicle. For this model, I have this little bit of material, and this here was one of the ECA cast resin pintle mounts, but it's an off cast. If you know, it's just missing the bottom portion that would go down a little bit further and have its bottom base. This piece here has been languishing away in the spare bin for quite a while now, and I think it would be a perfect fit to go ahead and adapt it to the rear portion of this model. As for the MG, as I've touched upon on a number of other videos, I have several cradle mounts that are used for both the 30 cal or the 50, and either which can be used on this vehicle, along with an M60, but that's a topic for another video. Back to what we have over here. So I'm really thinking on going ahead and adding this to the model. In order to do that, I went ahead and marked it with a Sharpie, and I'm just going to go ahead and cut this off on the bandsaw, sand it down so it's nice and flush, and then mount it directly to the model. Of course, it's going to get the other detailing, such as the lock knob, and of course have to drill this thing out for the cradle mount to slip in place, but that's something we could be discussing later on. However, this is just what the piece looks like right now, and again, I think it's a nice fitting vehicle to go on, as opposed to just leaving this thing languishing away in the spare bin where it's been for a number of years, possibly maybe even a decade or so. So I think it's about time this thing gets chopped up. So here we have the rear MG setup basically in its component form, and these here are about to be fitted to the model. Well, not so much the Cradle and the 1919, more about that in a moment. Here we have the same cradle, or I should say the same pintle mount from before, and here's what it looks like all fully completed. Here you can see the little vise type knob, which is used to clamp onto this little section here of the cradle, and this prevents it from being able to be lifted out and locks it in place, but still allows it to freely rotate. This small little hook over here I saw on the real V100 vehicle that I, again, saw in person, and if I'm not mistaken, if I was to take a guess, I'd say this here is actually for a chain retained rubber cover cap that goes and plugs up this section over here just to prevent this thing filling up with water. This is probably a bit of detailing I am going to be adding later on, but, you know, we'll see about that once the time does come. I went ahead, drilled a hole in the center here, put a piece of 16-inch steel rod through there, so that I could just plug this onto the model, and this will give the unit extra support, which is something that will give it much more strength compared to just glues alone. Even though the glues alone will hold it in place, when you have something like with this type of weight on top of it, it's something that can add a little bit of leverage and potentially pop the unit off if you just like bump into it or something. And this can happen specifically when you have all of this appendages hanging off it, like the way you see here. You know, the extra support is definitely something that's going to be much more appreciated. For the actual armament itself, this is where you really get to have fun with a build like this. These pintle mounts are completely universal, and you could throw basically almost anything on there as you wish, and in many cases, they did, specifically in Vietnam. There was a huge smorgasbord of weapons that were available for the crews to pick from, and you will see lots of different type of stuff hooked up here. Most commonly, you will probably find a yoke-mounted M60 GPMG. However, you could put an M2, you could put an A&M 250, you could put even probably an M134 minigun on it. Anything that will fit into into this pintle over here will be able to be mounted on the real unit, and these things are universal, so in many cases you did see wacky stuff like that. And again, that's part of the fun of the build. For this particular build here, I am going to be rolling with a Browning M1919A4, specifically a post-World War II upgraded version of the Browning 1919. These were used in Vietnam, and there are several photographs of these fitted to vehicles. In fact, I'll go ahead and throw one or two of them up on the screen right now. For the 1919, this is something that's not a stock component. The piece that you see here is a mix of ECA parts as well as also some Dragon components. As I touched upon in a recent video where I did a video review on the Dragon M1919, I stated in that video that in my opinion of all the 1919s on the market, the Dragon is probably the best. And in that video, I touched upon where, I built the plastic model, but one of the reasons why I acquired that build was so that I could make molds of the receiver sections so that I could utilize them on my own builds. As I frequently, basically as anyone will know me, I tend to build a lot of USGI vehicles, and you tend to need a lot of Brownings. And unlike the Dragon M2, which is still in production from another manufacturer, the 1919s, that's not really the case, so they're a little bit more on the scarcer end compared to the M2 counterpart. So for my build, it was probably a good idea to go ahead and make the molds of the receiver section just so that I have a readily available source for them and I could utilize them on my builds. So that's what we have here. The receiver section here is a resin casting clone of the Dragon tooling. Just like in the other 1919 video, this unit here received the exact same detail modifications, which would include things like the large fastener that we have here on the bottom. I went ahead and gave it the low rigidity braces right there on the rear forging section of the grip. The takedown, or I should say the spring retention notch, or not notch, it's like a slot screw. You push it and twist, and that locks the spring in place and allows you to lift the whole pistol grip out. That detailing is there. The other detailings would also include this, again, some little minute things. If you're a 1919 guy, you'll know what I'm referring to. Like this little slit line right over here on the lever where it makes contact with the latch. On the real one, it's a little bit of a weld over there, but the little slit here does the job for this scale. And that's basically it for the stock components. One thing that I went ahead and did, however, was I did tool up a bunch of new components to upgrade the Dragon 1919. Although the Dragon 1919 is the best on the market for a off-the-shelf unit, it does leave some room for improvement, and that is what we have right here. Probably one of the weaker aspects on the Dragon 1919 is the front assembly. Although here I have a stock Dragon 1919, for comparison, the front end looks pretty good, and for the most part it is. However, it does leave some room for improvement. So while looking at real Browning 1919s and having access to a real Browning 1919, I was able to take some better measurements and redesign the front shroud section. This unit here is now listed on the ECA catalog as several different options. We have some World War II versions, we have some Israeli versions, and this one here is the post-World War II US version. The difference is with the front booster section that we have here. You see, after World War II, the Brownings were originally chambered in 30-06, but when the U.S. military switched over to 7.62 NATO, they went ahead and upgraded lots of their armament. And one of the ones that were upgraded was the 1919. So in addition to changing out several of the internals to fit the new cartridge, one of the other things that was modified was the external booster section, and one thing that was designed was a flash suppressor, much along the lines as you see on the 1919 A6. Although the two are similar in concept, they are a different design. And the one that you see here was parroted exactly, or as close as humanly possible, off of, again, the real examples that I was researching. In addition to this unit, all of the ECA Browning front-end sections do have the shroud with the correct number of holes, the correct size of holes, the correct orientation of the holes, and we also have here the small little lock fastener that's right over there that is absent on the Dragon tooling. On the booster section, you can probably see it pop up, but it's so small and minute, but we also have here the little, it's like a ratchet type system where it allows the spring tension to be placed on the on the shroud itself just to prevent it from backing out. And there's also little punch marks that are used for the armor to make sure that the thing doesn't back out when in operation. We have the H bar right there on the inside, and we even have the hollow section here inside the booster, although you're not going to be able to see it in this clip. I do have a video, by the way, that's going to be posted on the ECA channel focusing just on these new Browning accessories that I have designed, and this is something that is going to be posted probably a week or so from this video here, so stay tuned for that. Regardless, this is all made out of HD 3D printed materials, and it's a single piece, and it's designed to be a drop-in installation onto the Dragon receiver. In addition to the front end section, another bit of detailing that was added and was absent on the Dragon tooling is the feed paw external mechanism that we have right here. This was something that was developed later on in the M1919's production, and it is absent on the Dragon tooling. This piece is a drop-in installation. It comes with the sets, and you just basically add the glue, drop it right here onto the side of the receiver, and it gives you so much more extra detailing, which is absent on the stock kit. This section here does have little fasteners that are right over there. We have the securing pin and the feed paw mechanism right there, or I should say the belt holder mechanism right there in, full view. Another bit of equipment that's supplied with the set is currently not fitted to this unit because this is going to be done after the model is fully weathered, but I have it right here off camera, and that is the safety bar. This is another accessory that was fitted to 1919s during World War II and was more prevalent after World War II. And basically, this was used to render the unit safe by locking, or just by pulling the BCG back with the charging handle. And with the way the 1919 is, it is a closed bolt firing system. So if you pull this all the way back, this unit here, which would be riveted right there to the side of the receiver, would hinge upward. And this little notch here would catch onto the charging handle and would hold it back in place, thus rendering the unit as safe. Then when it comes time for usage, you just pull that down, the BCG goes back forward, and then you're ready to, do what you have to do. All three of these components are found on each of these sets, regardless of the USGI World War II one or the post-World War II American one, and yes, even the Israeli unit come with the exact same components. All these pieces are made in HD 3D printed material, so the detailing on them is as crisp as humanly possible, or at least as I can possibly get. Also, you have enough components on each of these frets for 4 1919s, so there is a bit of value in that regard. For the actual cradle mount, because obviously you can't just have a unit like this just plopped onto the top of the unit, you need some kind of a cradle, and we have this unit here. This is another unit that I've touched upon in a few other videos. This is a ECA 3D printed cradle mount. ECA does have several cradle mounts that are listed on the catalog. This one here is the 3050 mount, as are a few of the others. There's a lot of adaptability on these things. But this one here is the simplified version compared to what I like to refer to as the D mount, which is this unit over here, which is much more complex. Having said that, both of these would still have been in service with the U.S. military, even as far into the Vietnam War timeframe. There were just so many of these things on inventory that it's not uncommon to see one or both of these in service at that time. If you see any of the gun trucks from the era, chances are you're going to see a bunch of different designs of cradles fitted in place, and it actually does make the modeling these things pretty interesting and a bit more flavorful. This one here is the simplified version compared to the D mount, where it utilizes lots of cast metal components. This one here, it's mostly just stampings, but it does the exact same job where you can mount either a Browning 1919 or an M2 HB, or an M250, for that matter. The unit, again, if it's fully functional in that we have the belt holder right over here. The tensioner, I should say. The can would fit into this place, and this is something that you're probably going to see as the video goes on. But this unit here is all HE3D, or it's not, it's just standard 3D printed. It doesn't need to be HD. The standard material is good to go, and this unit will just drop directly in place. As I touched upon before, these mounts are all to Dragon spec, either for the Browning M2 or for the 1919 like we have here. But you'll see how this looks as the video goes on. So with that long-winded segment out of the way, let's go ahead and get this thing fitted to the vehicle at this time. Some of the new parts that are being added to this model and also to the ECA catalog involve the antenna base mounts that we have here. The V100 has 3 of these antenna base mounts that are found on the rear deck portion, and you'll see what they look like momentarily once these pieces are fitted in place. The units that we have here are a pre-production sample of the new ECA V100 antenna well set, and it can be found on the ECA catalog. These ones here are a resin print, however, the production units are going to be made out of the standard white nylon. The set contains these 3 components that we have here, where we have a larger antenna well and 2 other smaller units. In addition to that, we also have these little plugs that we have here, and there are 3 of them that are supplied with the set. The plugs are to be fastened in place when an antenna base is not fitted to the vehicle. So for this vehicle over here, I am going to have 2 antennas in place, and the third one here is going to be the odd man out, and he's going to have this little plug fitted in place, and you'll see what that looks like once the units are fitted to the vehicle. The units here are fully detailed with the correct thickness of the material itself. We also have the weld beads integrally printed on, so these units are ready for installation out of the box. No other sculpting or anything is required. And also, you will see that the gutters are found in the appropriate locations, and they have the appropriate geometry based on the real 2 examples of V100s that I use for my reference. The larger unit over here only has 1 of the gutters, while on the smaller units, there are 2 of these gutters that are present. As for what exactly is going to be fitted inside of these wells, well, like I stated before, this vehicle is going to be receiving 2 antenna bases, as this is generally seen on many of the other V100s I've seen in period photographs, as well as also the real examples that I've had the opportunity to witness. Well, for the first antenna base, we're rolling with this one that we have here. This antenna base is known as the AS3900, and this is basically the de facto post-World War II antenna base that's seen on just about every single U.S. AFV or soft skin vehicle from the post-war time period all the way up until, yes, even today, these units are still utilized. The components that you see here on the table are the EastCoastArmory.com set and have been available now for about a year, maybe a year and a half. I tooled these up a little while ago, but finally this is the first time I have the opportunity to actually utilize one on one of my own builds. These units here are all made from 3D printings with the exception of 2 components, which I'll touch upon momentarily, but the parts are as detailed as I can physically make something. These parts here were created while utilizing some excellent reference materials based on real examples of this antenna base that I had some access to. So basically, if it's on the real one, or if at least it's on the photographs of the real one that I was studying, it's going to be present on the 1/6 scale counterpart. So like I stated before, the units all comprise, or I should say the majority of the units comprise of a HD 3D print. And the HD 3D print sections are all found on this one sprue. Of course, this thing had to break off because why not? But regardless, basically it's comprising of these 3 HD 3D printed parts. We have the main base, we have the screw-on section for the actual antenna, and we have the end tip for the antenna right here. If anyone is a fan of the channel, first I want to say thank you if you are, but if anyone have seen the Israeli Tehran 5 1/16 scale build that I did a little while ago, you'll note that I had to actually make this exact same component, but scale it down for 1/16. In that video, I mentioned that I took the files that were used for this unit over here, and I miniaturized them and optimized them for the 1/16 scale counterpart. So, if anyone had seen that video, this one here is the genesis of that component. So, the set here consists of, again, these 3D printed parts. However, in addition to these 3D printed parts, we also have these 2 sections over here that are not 3D print, or at least not in the configuration that you see here. This section here is the spring, and the spring on these antenna bases have this very distinctive shape to them. It's not like the World War II units where it's just a cylindrical type coil spring. On these post-war ones, they have this sort of like doorstop type look to them, is the best way to put it. On the model over here, the spring is actually made from cast rubber. However, the master is made from HD 3D print. This is so it has as much detail fidelity as the unit can possibly have. The reason why I went with cast rubber for this is because, well, the unit is designed to be fully flexible, as you can see. Inside of the rubber molding, there's actually some cable that's a steel cable. It's integrally molded in, and this gives some rigidity to the part, so you can have the piece be modeled in the straight position, or you can actually bend it like this and have it in the tied down state, which is commonly seen on these type of vehicles. On the top portion over here, you'll see a fastener with several notches cut into it. This is for the antenna wire hookup, which I'll touch upon in a second. But again, the way you see it is as per the real unit that I was using as reference. This longer stem section over here, this is used so that the unit can plug directly into this 3D printing over here. It has plenty of meat on it, which will give some better support once the unit is fitted in place. Back to the actual antenna base itself. So we have the main cluster unit, and we also have some fasteners that are around this section over here. These fasteners are to be intended for use if you're securing this to a Humvee or an M151 Mutt, for instance, and you do have the external type bracket, and in that case these nuts become relevant because once you secure the unit in place, you could use these nuts for the external detailing. For this vehicle over here, these nuts are not going to be relevant, so they're not going to be utilized. Regardless, I'll just go ahead and snip this guy here off of the sprue. And as you can see, these 4 descending stems here are replicating the actual fasteners themselves, which again, if you're installing this on a Humvee or some other soft skin, this would plug into place, and then these little nuts over here would then get secured into location, thus completing the detailing that is required. For this vehicle, I'm probably going to be snipping these off because, again, it's going to be just mounted in place by just drilling one small, large hole into the rear portion of the vehicle. But again, if you're looking for that type of detail fidelity, it's present here on the molding or on the printing as an integral part. So with the component now off, you really get to appreciate the detailing that I mentioned before. Here we have the internal detailing, which again, for this build, not really relevant, but if you have an M151 Mutt or any other type of soft skin, this is definitely going to be greatly appreciated. We have here the fastener details, the actual plug detailing, as well as some other details that again are found on the actual counterpart. And we even have here the bottom flush fit fasteners or countersunk fasteners, which would be found on the actual counterpart as well. Again, if it's on the real one, it's going to be present on this printing. Outside of the fasteners that I referenced before, the other 2 components that would have been found on the sprue is this little stem section, as well as also this connection point. And these 2 units are for the actual antenna wire itself. The antenna wire is not currently on the table, however, utilizes a 1/16 of an inch brass or some other type of rod. The units are designed so that you just snip them off of the sprue like this. The antenna wire gets plugged into this section over here. Note the long amount of material that we have, which again gives extra support. And on the bottom portion here, this would connect to the antenna spring like the way you see here. Note the stem here has the correct geometry, which would be present on the real unit, where the bottom section is a hex, and then the other piece is just a cylindrical portion. And then the end piece, which is like this weight type system, has its very distinctive hot air balloon type shape as well. This just tops on the top portion of the antenna wire, thus completing the look. Another group of parts that are going to be added to the model are these pieces that we have here. These little brackets are going to be used for the side hull area. And on the real vehicle, the purpose and usage of these components are used to keep the side hatches propped in either the open or the closed state. The short stubby ones over here are used for the closed state, where you can actually lock the thing up with a padlock and prevent people from getting inside. And the longer ones here are used to, well, in the opposite direction, to prop the hatch in the open position and keep it there fast in place, just to prevent it from flopping around and possibly slamming onto somebody if they're driving this vehicle with the top hatch in the open position, which was something that was commonly done. The units here are made out of a 3D printed resin material. However, these are a pre-production sample, and the production units are going to be included with the ECA V100 side hatch sets. Currently, they have not yet been listed on the catalog because I needed to design these pieces over here, and once these are added to the sets, I will then be able to go ahead, figure out the pricing on them, and list them to the ECA catalogs. This is something that's probably going to happen shortly after the filming of this video, but we'll see how that pans out as time goes on. These pieces here are all fully detailed, where they have the appropriate shape and geometry to them. We also have here on the longer one a small little hole right there in the lower third section. This hole is to secure on a chain retained locking pin, which again is what's used to lock the hatch in the open position and prevent it again from flopping around. All these units here do have their well beads integrally printed on, so they are ready for installation straight out of the packaging. On a similar note, we also have these 4 components here. These here are the fuel breather valves and are something that I didn't touch upon in the last video, but right in front of the bow hatch sections, or I should say right next to the bow hatch sections, are these breather valves. These breather valves here are, well, connected to the fuel line and allow the unit to siphon properly. And what's unique about the V100 is that they are mounted so much higher above compared to, you know, standard vehicles. And this was done because the vehicle is amphibious. Obviously, you need to have your breather valves as far away from the water line as possible. And on the V100, they decided to put it right there on the top near the crew hatch sections. These sections here, again, are 3D printed out of a resin material, and these sections are again going to be included with the ECA bow hatches that are for the V100 Armored car. The pieces are as closely resembling the real unit as possible that I had, again, the opportunity of researching. And also, you can see, just like with the other parts, they have their well beads integrally printed on. All of those components I just mentioned, including these guys over here, are going to be primed and then mounted to the model, and once fitted in place, you really get to see exactly how everything looks once completed. And here we have another new item to discuss, and these are the hatch retention latches. These components over here are all made out of a 3D printed material, only these ones here are actual production units. Or at least they should be. We'll see how they mount to the model and how they function. So, but so far it appears that they're going to be just fine in this type of condition. So the pieces themselves, they're the exact same component, but it's just replicated 3 times for the 3 hatches that are found on the top deck. Namely, the 2 crew hatches in the front and the rear crew hatch found on the rear. This unit here was really designed as close as possible to the real one that I had some fantastic photographs that I took at the one from the show. And here you get to see what they look like. They are very similar in design to the World War II ones that are found on Sherman tanks, as well as also on the Pershing and other vehicles like that. The only difference is that on the rear section here of the latch, we have this extended fork that sticks out that's welded in place. And yes, the well beads are all integrally printed on both the fork section as well as also on the bottom base. And the other difference is with this little rear section that we have here. We have this boss that's welded to the top deck. There is a bolt that sticks up with a nut on the top, and this basically keeps this fork here in place. Now, there's no spring or anything else inside here, and if I didn't know any better, I'd say that the purpose of this is possibly just to give extra leverage, so it makes opening and closing the unit a bit easier. The units on the real ones do have a spring on them, and just like the World War II ones, they're basically wrapped around the piece itself. However, trying to replicate that in this scale was problematic, so the pieces just have the components just sans that little spring. The pieces are designed to be fully functional. As you can see, the units are hollow, so a pin can be inserted in place, and with the way the pieces are designed, they should be able to lock the hatches in the open state, and we'll see how that pans out once these components here are assembled and removed off of the sprue. So we'll circle back to that momentarily. And here are those 2 brackets secured to the hull at this time. Here you get an idea on how they actually function. So here we have the padlock version right over here, and then when the hatch is swung open, the lock pin one is right over here, and everything lines up accordingly as it should. Moving topside brings us to the rear gunner station. Here you can see the pintle mount that I touched upon before. This now has been permanently secured to this model. The only thing that I need to add is just a little bit of sculpted weld beads in this section over here, but this is going to be sculpted along with some other welds with another bit of detailing that's going to be added to the model here at that time, which is going to be discussed in the next video. But regardless, you really get to see how much this area really fleshed out, and fleshed out quite nicely with the detailing here of the pintle mount, the cradle, as well as that 1919 A4 as I mentioned earlier. From the Browning takes us to the antenna base, and here you get to see the antenna base well secured in place with all of its weld bead detailings, of course, and you can also see here the addition of the antenna base mount. Move the MG out of the way momentarily. So as I mentioned before, the spring section here is molded out of rubber, and this gives the unit some flexibility to it. Not nearly as much as if it was made out of a real spring, however, this unit is much better compared to if it was just a solid item, or I should say a solid, standard plastic type material. The unit does have some flex to it, which is pretty cool. Right now, it's not glued in place. It's only held in temporarily. So, obviously, as the build gets closer to the end, and once this unit is permanently installed, it is going to be in a much firmer manner. But even though you can see that it still has some cool flex and bounce to it. On the topic of the antenna base, here's the unit removed from the model at this time. It is not yet glued in place. This is something that's going to be fitted to the model permanently after everything is painted and weathered. And this is actually one of the tail end items that are going to be installed. And you'll see why, but specifically in how I paint everything as the project progresses. But regardless, here's what the unit looks like, fully assembled. We have a brass rod on the detailing over here to act as the antenna. And we even have that little weighted object, as I mentioned before. Both this unit as well as this unit here slip onto the 1/16 of an inch rod without any sort of extra modifications being required. You simply remove off the sprue and slip the unit directly into place. A drop of glue is going to be utilized on these components as the build progresses and we get closer to the end. But here's a good idea on exactly how the unit fleshes out. Flopping over to the opposite side, you get to see the other two antenna mounts in place with their guards and protectors on them. This one here has the secondary antenna fitted in place, and this one here is the MP65. Of course, more information on this will come with the paintwork as time goes on, and just like with the other one, it is not yet currently glued in place permanently for the same reasons that I mentioned on the other antenna base. So at the moment, it just plugs in where it needs to go, but you get a good idea on what the detailing is going to look like. On this one over here, there is no antenna fitted in place, and because of that, it does have a cover cap mounted right there on the inside. Hopefully that comes out on camera. And also briefly touching upon the guard itself, you can see the gutter hole right there on the side, and there's another one on the reverse portion of this unit. Moving forward takes us to the hatch retention latches, and this was that bit of detailing I touched upon before, but here's what they look like fully painted and mounted to the model. As you can see, they are still fully functional, and not only are they functional in this regard, but they are also fully functional in that they will hold the hatch closed, or I should say in the open position, when locked in. Just like so. And as I mentioned in the previous video, this hatch, as well as the two in the front, do have some sort of a spring counterbalance system. And the latch is holding the hatch open in this position right now on its own strength, even with against the spring pressure. And as for the spring pressure, well, it has this really cool feature where if I hit the latch over here, the unit will just simply close in the position that we have here. Now, obviously, the real one, this wouldn't be the case. The hatch is very heavy on the real one, so it wouldn't just spring it closed like you saw on this model over here. But with the way the model is, you can see how the latch system is actually pretty beneficial, specifically if you want to display this model with the hatches in the open position. Say if you have a rear gutter figure in this section over here. Or if you just want to have fun with the little, mousetrap feature that this unit does have. Same is also true, of course, for the two units found right here on the front. Here you can see the latches fitted in place, as well as you can also see the fuel breathers right there next to the hatch. This is a mirror image on the opposite side of the vehicle. With the camera brought in closer, you really get to appreciate the detailing in better focus. And as for opening and closing, well, just like with the other unit, it is fully functional. With the hatches in the open position, you can also see the last bit of detailing I'm going to be referencing in this video, and that is the rubber headrest that we have right here on each of the bow hatches. This rubber section is made from a 3D printed master, and it is made out of cast rubber, leaving for some very realistic detailing that we have here. These are supplied with the ECA hatch sets. And of course, just like with the other hatch, if I hit the mechanism, they will definitely open up, and that'll allow me to go ahead and have the hatches in their closed position. So, as you can see, basically the model's hull is, at this point, done and is basically ready for painting. The reason why I keep saying the word basically is because there's still one bit of detailing that needs to be added, and that is to the rear section that we have right here behind the turret. There is a special guard that was fabricated and mounted in this place to prevent the turret here from muzzle sweeping the rear gunner, which obviously is something that would be very bad. So this is something that still needs to be fabricated. I'm going to be fabricating that out of brass. However, that's something that's going to be done in the next video, because in the next video, you guessed it, with the hull basically done, the last thing I need to work on is the turret. If anyone's a fan of the ECA channel, first I want to say thank you, and I also want to say thank you for anyone out there who's not just a fan of the channel, but also follows us on Facebook, because if you have been, this should not be a surprise to you, but this is not the turret that I'm going to be utilizing for this build. Right now it's just sitting on the model here more or less as a placeholder, but in its place I actually designed a brand new turret in CAD, and at the time I'm filming this, the last of the CAD files have been completed and the thing's ready to head off into production. I'm going to go ahead and throw up some pictures of the unit on camera, or I should say on screen now, and you should be able to see what the following unit is going to look like with both its interior and exterior detailing. Needless to say, this simple unit over here is definitely going to be phased out in favor of this new one. But because of this new one, I can't go ahead and add the guard in place at this time, because I really don't know where it's going to go. It'd be really anticlimactic to go ahead and fabricate everything, only to find out, oops, it's in the wrong place and I got to go ahead and redo it. So for the time being, I'm going to put a pin in that aspect of the build, and I'm going to be addressing that once the turret comes in hand. I'll be able to install it to the model, and then from there I can finish up the guard. And at that point, the model's actually ready for painting. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself, because all that's going to be discussed in much more detail in the next project update video, so stay tuned for that. And that is the perfect point to sign off on this project update video for this 1/6 scale Cadillac Gage XM706, aka the V100 Armored car. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to this channel, where it's a great way to keep up to date on new 1/6 scale project update videos like this one over here, as well as the other smaller scale model showcase videos that frequently get posted to this channel. Another way to keep in the loop of new posted content is by liking us on Facebook. There, I have more photographs of not just this project, but also several of the other larger and smaller scale projects that have been seen on this channel previously. Furthermore, don't forget to swing by EastCoastArmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detail components. Thanks again. I'll be seeing you all again on the next one. Until then.